All right, so Rob Lee, this is going to be a direct response to your comments that you see pictured on the screen here. Like I said, to me, it makes more sense to just talk rather than typing 1,000 words, back and forth in paragraphs and that sort of thing. This is much easier. So here we go. The first thing you talk about is first thing I want to say is that you missed the entire point of my argument when looking at this letter. For example, it says in paragraph, this is your comment in paragraph 8, sentence 2, the document you are dissecting states, there those who worship Serapis are, in fact, Christians, and those who call themselves bishops of Christ are, in fact, devotees of Serapis. So in Alexandria, Egypt, there were worshippers of Serapis who were called Christians, and there were devotees of Serapis who were called bishops of Christ. Now, I don't understand how you bring this up and completely miss what I said about this. The very nature of the letter that was being discussed, and I encourage you to go back and read it again. The very nature of that letter was to discuss all of the negative things about Alexandria. And what I said in the video was that from the context of the letter, just reading it plainly, the whole point of him mentioning Christians worshiping Serapis and bishops of Christ worshiping Serapis, if that was a normal thing of a religion that was normal and common in that time and period, it wouldn't be worth mentioning. But yet he mentions it because that wasn't supposed to be the case. He found Christians who were supposedly worshiping Christ, aka Jesus, but instead they're worshiping something else. That goes right in line with what he says about the Jews. The Jews are not following their religion. They're chasing money. There's all kind of bad things going on here. Nothing is right. Everything's backwards. That's literally the theme of the letter. So I can understand why if you just read it and you see this on the surface level, it could be, to someone that can seem like, well, hey, case closed, Christians worship Serapis. But, all we have to use is basic reading comprehension and just look at what the author of the letter is trying to convey, right? I can understand if you don't agree with me on that, but it's just common sense. Think about this part right here. Well, think about this statement here. Even the patriarch himself, when it comes to Egypt, is forced by some to worship Serapis, by others to worship Christ. Now, you're saying that Serapis equals Christ by this statement. To me, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. This is a clear distinction of two different people. If you use basic reading comprehension, and I'm not saying this as an insult, I'm saying this as in, if you just read it for what it says without any kind of bias, it makes perfectly good sense. The patriarch comes there. Some people force him to worship Serapis. Other people force him to worship Christ. How could that possibly be talking about the same person? That would be like me saying some people forced him to worship Steph Curry and other people forced him to worship Chef Curry. That makes absolutely no sense because that would be talking about that's what you're saying that this is saying. That it's it's identifying one person or being or deity or whatever. It's identifying this one being in two different ways and making an unnecessary distinction. That's not how we write, and that's not how that makes no sense whatsoever. I'm going to rephrase this. I'm going to give you another example just for my point. If I said the patriarch came and said his favorite tennis player is Serena Williams, but later on he said his favorite tennis player is Christ, you would clearly think that they're two different people, and not just because like we know Christ and Serena Williams aren't the same. But I mean, just the distinction, just the way that the statement is made, it implies more than one, which refutes the whole idea that there are two. This is not even a good argument right here. Now, what you say here, when I read the information you provided, it appears obvious to me that Augusta was trying his best to convey to the reader that those who worship Serapis and those who worship Christ were one and the same at the time of the writing. That is actually correct. I agree with you with that. I agreed with that in my initial video. And what I said was, number one, if that was true, it it's true in Alexandria. He goes out of his way to mention that it happens in Alexandria, which implies that's not normal. Then he goes on to mention this observation of Christians worshiping Serapis, along with a bunch of other negative observations about Alexandria, which goes into my point of the whole point of him saying this is that this was not to be, this didn't make any sense. Think about it. What I said that in the video, so there's really no point for me to go on over this uh, now. As for this part here, where you say when the full name of Serapis is taken into account, it is almost impossible to not see the connection. Now, Serapis Christus, I hear modern people saying Serapis Christus. I haven't seen any ancient documents that actually says Serapis Christus. This is just something that I see people add on to it and claim, oh, he was actually called this. But even if he was called this actually doesn't. That's a weak argument. It wouldn't change anything because Christopher Reeves was called Superman. Shaquille O'Neal was called Superman. Dwight Howard went by Superman, and then Giannis Antetokounmpo went by Superman. So you know, I don't really know what else I need to say to that. Even if Serapis did go by that name, that has nothing to do with whether or not someone else went by that name or that title, because it's not a name, it's a title. It's like Caesar. How many Caesars were there? Julius Caesar wasn't the only Caesar. I wish I could remember the name of the rest of them. Matter of fact, let me check it out. Let me look. So here is a list of Caesars from the Encyclopedia Britannica website. All of these people were called by the title Caesar, not the name. Christ is not a name, it's a title. Augustus Caesar, Tiberius Caesar, Caligula Caesar, Claudius, Nero. Look at these. These are all, by your logic, the only one that could really be a Caesar is Augustus. Because if we applied the same logic to the Caesars that you are applying to the title of Christ, you would discredit anyone that came after that had the same title. That's literally what you're doing. I don't know, it's obviously not intentional, but do you realize that Christ is not a name? It's a title. It means Savior, right? I mean, I'm sure you know that, but I needed to point this out because this is what you're doing. Would you be consistent in as to say that Tiberius and Caligula did not exist simply because Augustus was written with that name first? Now, if someone wrote about Caesar, which one would they be talking about? Would they be talking about Augustus? Would they be talking about Tiberius? The reason why I say that is because if you have more than one person who share a common title, then you have to go by other contexts. So when you look at Christian writings, and there are tons of Christian writings before the Council of Nicaea, you can't just assume they're talking about Serapis Christos because that one came first. To me, I think that's pretty straightforward. If that's not, let me know and I'll try to elaborate a little more. And speaking of um, Christian writings before the Council of Nicaea, this is earlychristianwritings.com. And look at all of these writings about Christians, excuse me, all of these writings by Christians or about Christians before the Council of Nicaea, earlychristianwritings.com. Check it out. And this is what I don't understand because when you woke folk, and I don't mean it in a bad way, I'm just generalizing here. When you woke folk come to me and talk about, your research, you never talk about any of these. You never talk about any of these writings. I bet y'all don't even know they exist. They're not secret, they're not hidden away. It's just that what happens is a lot of you woke folk tend to just listen to woke teachers and you don't actually do actual research. Because the idea that Jesus didn't exist before the Council of Nicaea is easily refuted. It's insane. For example, let's go to First Clement. I just checked it out. Let's go to First Clement. Let's go to the English translation of First Clement. But before I do that, let me go back and give you. This is the age range. This is the date range that various scholars or whoever believe that this was written. Notice there's a range here. Some people think it was written earlier, AD 80. Some people believe it was written in AD 140. Now, First Clement. English translation. The very first chapter, you're going to see the name of Jesus Christ show up. The church of God which sojourneth in Rome, to the church of God which sojourneth in Corinth, to them which are called and sanctified by the will of God through our Lord Jesus Christ. So right here, very first document that I looked at, well, for the sake of this video, I already knew about it. The very first document that I go to, and the very first paragraph mentions the name Jesus Christ. Now, obviously, this was written in Greek, since this was written back then, so it would have said Iesus, right? Therefore, this one document, and I'm gonna go back so you can see what it is, so you can look, research it and that sort of thing. It's earlychristianwritings.com. It's First Clement. Clement is one of the early church leaders. He was like the second generation of believers after the apostles. You don't have to go to this website to find him. You can go and whatever historical site that you go to for research to find Clement of Rome, and you can find them. My whole point is like this is not some secret hideout where documents are that someone made up and they're only here. You can validate them by other sources. But the very first document that we look at mentions Jesus Christ by name. So this whole idea that he didn't exist before the Council of Nicaea is refuted right there. Look at all these documents. How many of these documents do I need to go to convince you that the idea that Jesus didn't exist is silly? It's laughable. Serious scholars don't believe that. That's laughable. That's just a woke thing. Now, I want to look at another one because this is probably of all of the documents that I've looked at, this one is probably my favorite. This is Lucius of Samosata, who's a fictional writer, or I don't know, he writes all kind of stuff. And he mentions Christians in his story of this guy named Peregrinus. Peregrinus is a guy who apparently was an actual historical figure who went to the Olympics back in the day and set himself on fire in some sort of protest or something like that, right? So that's what this story is about. Again, Lucian of Samosata, you can see it right here. Lucian of Samosata, the passing of Peregrinus. Obviously, like I said, you go to whatever site you need to go to confirm that this is a legit document that existed when it was supposed to have existed, etc. Now, this story is about Proteus Peregrinus. It's not about Christians, but there's a part in the story where he talks about Peregrinus' interaction with the Christians. Now, let's look at what Lucian of Samosata wrote about the Christians here. Um, it was then that, let me highlight it again. It was then that he, talking about Peregrinus, it was then that he learned the wondrous lore of the Christians by associating with their priests and scribes in Palestine. And how else could it be? And at twice he made them all look like children, for he was a prophet, cult leader, head of the synagogue, and everything, all by himself. He interpreted and explained some of their books and even composed many, and they revered him as a god, made use of him as a lawgiver, and set him down as a protector. Next after that other, to be sure, whom they still worship, the man who was crucified in Palestine because he introduced this new cult into this world. Now, what you have right here in this section, you have a non-Christian writer writing about Peregrinus' interaction with Christians. And the Christians, he believed that the Christians are stupid. If you read along, the writer believes that the Christians are stupid because this man came along, Peregrinus came along, and the Christians in that area, or at least some of them in that area, thought that this man was some kind of prophet. So they put their trust in him. And it says he interpreted and explained some of their books and even composed many. Now, I don't know if this is what actually happened or if this is just a claim or whatever, but whatever the case may be, Lucian of Samosata said that the Christians came across this man and basically started worshiping him as a prophet and as a deity. It says they revered him as a god and made use of him as a lawgiver and set him down as a protector. So the Christians, they were called Christians already, they come across this man and they start praising this man and following this man, right? This man named uh, Peregrinus. Now look at what it says. It says, and set him down as a protector. Next, after that other, to be sure, whom they still worship. Meaning that they set him down as a protector next to someone else who they still worship, right? And who is it that they still worship? The man who was crucified in Palestine because he introduced this new cult into this world. This right here, Lucian of Samosata identifies Christians as a cult that was started by a man who was crucified in Palestine. Hey, come on, please don't be silly and say that he didn't use the name Jesus. Come on now. We know what Christianity teaches. We know what the historical narrative is that Christians, you know what? I got something better. I'll give you an actual document, not from a fictitious writer or whatever this guy is, but that actually says who was crucified. But before I do that, I just want to point out this literally says right here. Now look, check this out. We're going to read this because this is another thing that just puts the nail in the coffin. And it's a lot to read, so bear with me. Indeed, people came even from the cities in Asia, sent by Christians at their common expense. By the way, before I read this, I am not reading, this is not to be, I'm not putting this forth as an evidence that Christianity is the true religion and it's awesome and that sort of thing. No, I'm just going back to say this is what the ancients actually wrote about Christianity and what they said. I have a whole video series doing this, and what you're going to see is that none of them associate Christians with Serapis, except for Hadrian, not Hadrian, except for the one letter, probably Hadrian. I can't remember whether it was to Hadrian or from Hadrian. But the only one that even associates Christians with Serapis is that one single document, and it's a connection that's made in a negative way. Like this is disgusting. It should not be this way. But anyway, let us continue. Indeed, people came even from the cities in Asia, led by the Christians at their common expense, to succor and defend and encourage the hero. They're talking about Peregrinus. They show incredible speed whenever such a public action is taken, for in no time they lavish their all. So it was then in the case of Peregrinus. Much money came to him from them by reason of his imprisonment, and he procured not a little revenue from it. The poor wretches have convinced themselves, first and foremost, that they I'm going to stop here because this is going to start going into the beliefs of the Christians. So this person is saying like this guy is a charlatan, he's a fake prophet, he's a con man, and these Christians are falling for it, right? So what you're about to read next is very important because this is coming from someone who's not a Christian and who doesn't even respect them. First and foremost, that they are going to be immortal and live for a long time, live for all time, in consequence of which they despise death and willingly give themselves into custody, most of them. Furthermore, their first lawgiver persuaded them that they are all brothers of one another, after they have transgressed once for all by denying the Greek gods and worshiping that crucified Sophist himself and living under his laws. I gotta read it again. These people have a way of being very wordy. Furthermore, their first lawgiver, talking about the Christians, their first lawgiver persuaded them that they are all brothers of one another, after they have transgressed once for all, by denying the Greek gods and worshiping that crucified Sophist himself and living under his laws. Now, who's the crucified Sophist? Is it Serapis? Is there or Jesus? See, this is what I'm saying. There is way more to be looked at than just what the woke teachers tell you. And I'm not saying this as an insult to say like, well, hey, you only know what you're told or anything like that. But my whole point is that there is the amount of information that is out there to refute the claim that Christians worship Serapis is makes it laughable to make that claim. Now, on the surface, if you only looked at certain things, I can see why someone would understand it. But if you actually look at like the whole wealth of literature that's out there that exists, it becomes laughable. These things, like I said, these things aren't hard to refute. So you have another document here. You have another document that talks like I said, it doesn't say the name Jesus, and the people will say, well, people who are being disingenuous would say, well, it doesn't say Jesus, so it's not Jesus. Come on now, we know Christianity, we know the story of Christianity. And this person literally says that the one who was crucified started their religion. It says, he persuaded them they are all brothers by denying the Greek gods. See, this is what I'm saying. This right here says that the Christians deny the Greek gods. Serapis is a Greek god. Therefore, this cannot be talking about Serapis. It has to be talking about some other Christ. Even if you want to argue it's not Jesus, it can't be Serapis. At least not these group of people right here. Which now, this is consistent with what I said about Hadrian and why he mentions that Christians worship Serapis. Because Christians aren't supposed to worship Serapis. And we know that from the Bible. We know that from Lucius of Samosata here that they don't do it. If you look at Origen, if you look at Celsus, if you look at any other people that wrote during that time, it's obvious Christians don't worship Serapis, which is why when Hadrian was writing to, I think his nephew or somebody, when Hadrian wrote that letter, he commented that the Christians here worship Serapis because that was a ridiculous thing. So that all of this, I don't want to talk in circles. Um, let's see. There's really not much else to say about this document here. I'm gonna go back up to the top so you can see the name of it one more time, so you can research on this site or wherever you want to go. Is Lucian of Samosata, the passing of Peregrinus. Now, I just want to address again. Someone may say, well, this says that the Christians will worship in this man and that they were stupid, so Christianity's false. Okay, you can say that if you want, but that's not the point of me bringing this up. The point of me bringing this up is to show you what ancient people said about Christianity. Because modern woke folk, and again, I don't use that term as an insult, just for me to generalize a group of people. Modern woke folk say one thing and make claims about Christianity, but when you look at the people who lived and interacted with Christians during the time period, they say something entirely different. Now, as for the man who was crucified, we're on BibleHub.com. We're in the Bible. We all know the story, but I'm going to read it anyway. We just saw in the story of passing of Peregrinus that the author said that Christianity was started by a man who was crucified, that they worshipped. And let's read. There's a reason why I'm reading this, and I'm going to. When you look at the next thing I look at after this, you'll see why. 1 John 19:1. So Pilate took Jesus and had. I'm not going to read all this, by the way. So Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged, and the soldiers twisted together crowns of thorns and placed it on his head and a purple cloak on him. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to skip down. Jesus has a discussion with Pilate. Jesus says some things that are profound, and Pilate's like, blah, 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 blah. They have a discussion. Now, it says here, therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat on the judgment seat at a place called the pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now, I'm skipping some more because I don't want to read everything. You can read it. It's John 19, starting in verse 1. After all of this stuff, it says, so he handed him over to them to be crucified. So Pilate is responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus. The followers of Jesus were called Christians. Christians worship the crucified Jesus, crucified man. So again, the very fact that number one, the Bible mentions the name Jesus or Jesus, because the Bible, the New Testament was written in Greek, so the name would have been Jesus. Now, if you want to argue about the letter J or something like that, I'll deal with that later in this video, but let's go with the name Jesus, because that's what we know that was a real name. We know that the Christians worship the crucified Jesus, right? We had a non-Christian who doesn't like Christians tell us that the Christians worship and were founded by a crucified man. What more evidence do you need? That should be enough, but I know it's not going to be enough, so I'm going to give you one more piece of evidence. All right, we are back at early Christian writings because now we're going to look at something that was written by an actual historian. We're going to look at Cornelius Tacitus. Now, again, all of this is so you can go and research who this person is and all of that stuff. And did he really write this? You know, we're open here. We're open. Cornelius Tacitus was a Roman historian. He wasn't a Christian, but he wrote about the Christians. I mean, he wrote about history. So he mentioned. Let's just look at it, right? I got to go down to it. It's in book 1544 because he wrote a million books or a million paragraphs, I should say. This makes no sense. All right, now this is where he's going to say something about Christians, and this is why I showed you that where in the Bible it says that Jesus was crucified, and this is going to connect to Lucian of Samosata talking about Christians being worshiping a crucified person. Obviously, you can read what happened before this for context. I'm not trying to hide anything, but this is a lot to read. So we're going to start here and read 1544. Such indeed were the precautions of human wisdom. The next thing was to seek means for propitiating the gods, and recourse was had to the Sibylline books, by the direction of which prayers were offered to the Vulcanus, Ceres, and Proserpina. Juno too was entreated by the matrons, first in the capital, then on the nearest part of the coast. They're saying that after something happened, I believe it was the fire of Rome, if you go back and read, but something happened and they said, oh, we got to pray to the gods to make this right. So it's mentioning some gods that the people worship, right? And then let me start back over here. First in the capital, then on the nearest part of the coast, whence water was procured to sprinkle the fane and image of the goddess. And there were sacred banquets and nightly vigils celebrated by married women. But all human efforts, all the lavish gifts of the emperor, and the propitiation of the gods did not banish the sinister belief that the conflagration was the result of an order. Talking about the fire of Rome. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class headed for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Now, I gotta stop here. This is it. This is key. Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class headed for their abominations called the Christians. If Serapis was a god created by the Greeks to get people to unite under worship, under like worship under this god, why would they be hated by the people? That doesn't make any sense. But if these Christians worship some crucified Jewish rabbi and didn't worship the Greek gods, that would make them that would be a reason to hold them in contempt. Let's continue. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hand of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the source of the evil. Now, Judea is the area where Jesus' ministry was at, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. So now it goes on to say like what happened to the Christians after that, right? That's not relevant for this argument I'm making, but obviously feel free to read it if you want to. Now this one it says Christus. Now I know someone's going to say, "Oh, it says Christus and not Christ. That's different." Come on, now be an adult. Don't be disingenuous. It says Christus, from whom the name had its origin, referring to the Christians. So it says the Christians were started by Christus, and this Christus, it says this Christus who started Christianity suffered the extreme penalty under the reign of Tiberius Caesar at the hand of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. This is a non-Christian historian telling you that Christianity was started by a Christ who lived in Judea, who was crucified by Pontius Pilate. Let's go back to John 19. Who crucified Jesus? Pontius Pilate. This stuff is very simple for us Christians to respond to. It's not complicated. It's not hard. It doesn't make us scared. At least those of us who've actually learned some stuff. I could do this all night. I could do this all night. Let's go back to, again, what I just read from. Let me go back up here. It's Cornelius Tacitus. It's called the Annals of Tacitus. So this is his summary of history spanning a certain amount of time, and he talks about different people. The section I read from was book or chapter, I don't know what it's called. Section 15. Sorry if this is hurting your eyes. 1544. That's a lot of writing. This section here, Cornelius Tacitus, Annals, 1544. So Lucian of Samosata, who's not a Christian, said that Christianity was started by the Christ who was crucified. Cornelius Tacitus, who's not a Christian, wrote that Christianity was started by the Christus, who was crucified. And this is an actual historical historian. One was an author, one was a historian. None of them were Christians. So I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here. Now, if you go on my page, Logical Faith, if you go on my page and look at playlists, you'll see a playlist called Jesus versus Serapis. And in this playlist, what I'm doing is I'm addressing the claim that Jesus was created at the Council of Nicaea and all of that. And the way that I'm addressing that claim is I'm going back through time from 325, and I'm looking at documents written by different people that discuss Christianity. And I'm asking the question, does this author sound like he's describing a Christianity that worships Jesus, or Christianity that worships Serapis? Now, forget all of your other objections about Christianity, right? The letter J, or I don't know, things you may think about Easter, or whatever issues you have against Christianity. You got to learn how to deal with one thing at a time. You can't look at one thing that's staring you in the face and reject it because you have some other assumption about Christianity based on something else somewhere else. You know what I mean? What I mean is, a lot of people will reject the stuff that I just showed them because they're stuck on the letter J. Let each thing speak for themselves, and as you work through them, you can fit them together. But what I find is that a lot of times when I talk to Christians, when I talk to people about this, it don't matter what I say. They never admit when they're wrong because they just jump to the next objection. So I could show them, well, Jesus did exist. There are documents that mention Jesus. And they would say, well, it don't matter because of the letter J. And then I would show them about the letter J. And then they say, well, it don't matter because of this. It doesn't matter because of the new moon god or some other thing. And then that's not how you do research. That's not how you learn. If you're truly as open-minded as you say, and I'm speaking generally here, then you have to be willing to examine your own beliefs, not just examine the beliefs of others. And what I have here is I'm looking at different people. Some of these people are black, by the way. Origen was an African. Lucius Lactantius was an African, by the way. Um, I'm looking at what ancient writers wrote about Christianity, and it's pretty clear that they're talking through the context of what they're saying. They're talking about Jesus and not Serapis. So please take the time to check out these videos. They're tedious. You can see how long they are because I'm reading text. They're tedious, but if you genuinely want to learn, or at least, at the very least, if you genuinely just want to understand my point here, take the time to watch because you can learn a lot. I can guarantee you. Now, a lot of people know about Tacitus, and what they'll do is, now I just proved to you that Tacitus, he confirms that he confirms that Christianity was started by a man who was crucified by Pontius Pilate in Judea. People will ignore that to try to find some other reason to discredit Tacitus. And that's At that point, you're just being dishonest. You're not being open-minded. You're not researching. You're not being woke. At that point, you're just trying to find ways to be right and ignore facts. So please don't do that. Whoever's watching this, please don't do that. You're not. That's not being intelligent. That's not being smart. That's just being dishonest. And that's being dishonest and willfully ignorant. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the letter J. Where am I? Right now, I am on a video that I made last year called No J, No Jesus. I see somebody disliked it. How do you dislike it? It's nothing but facts. This, this is a video I made called No J, No Jesus, and this is a 15-minute video addressing the claim of no J equals no Jesus. And what you're seeing on the screen here is what was used before the letter J became the letter J. And look at this. Romeo and Juliet, that's still pronounced Juliet. It's still pronounced Juliet. The letter J, if you watch this video, in the beginning of this video, I look at the dictionary, I look at ancient literature, I look at the Bible. The letter J is simply a spin-off of the letter I. And if you don't believe me, just look at what's on the screen right here. Romeo and Juliet, not Juliet, it's Juliet. The letter J, the letter I was used before the letter I was used for J sounds and I sounds. And then eventually, I can't remember the guy's name, it's in the video here. Eventually, the guy started using the J instead of an I to make the differentiation. The interesting thing is that there are other letters that didn't exist right away, but nobody ever challenges those or ever complains about those. Like the letter W, you know what? Just watch the video. Because there are other letters that are spin-offs of original letters. And nobody ever complains about those. And I've never heard anyone say that Julius Caesar didn't exist, even though Julius Caesar has a J in it. They only say that about Jesus, which is kind of weird.